The U.S. Navy has finally acknowledged that videos appearing to show UFOs flying through the air are real.
There's footage and records of objects in the skies that we don't know exactly what they are.
The recent disclosures around UAPs are only one example of how our current metaphysics of materialism is being challenged. Because how do you make sense of objects that seem to defy the laws of physics and that perhaps aren't even physical at all?
I got that.
If you wanted to take a right-hand turn, it would take you roughly half the state of Ohio to do it. And yet what we're seeing are objects that can do 90-degree turns.
So they have an obvious, objective, physical phase to them. But they mix the physical phase with the mental phase. They don't make a distinction between the two. It's as much a mental projection as it is an objective physical thing. Now, which metaphysics allows for that? Materialism? No.
Now, this video is not only about UAPs. It is about anomalous phenomena in general that materialism cannot account for. Think, for instance, about altered mental states like psychedelic trips or near-death experiences. And less exotic, but perhaps more important, how materialism cannot account for human consciousness itself, thereby basically reducing human existence to an anomaly in our universe.
We identify with our conscious inner life, and we are told that nature is not conscious. Nature is just physical in the sense of being something completely distinct from consciousness. So it feels like we are anomalies, like we don't belong here. We are ephemeral anomalies that come to an end very quickly.
What if we wouldn't see our conscious inner life as an anomaly, but as the fundamental nature of reality? And what if I would tell you that taking mind instead of matter as fundamental in our universe is completely compatible with our current understanding of physics?
The world is of the same kind of that which you identify with, which is your conscious experience. The world too is made of conscious experience, not your conscious experience. There is conscious experience out there in other people and in nature at large, but it's also conscious experience. It's something of the same nature of that which you are.
Welcome on the Essentia Foundation's channel, the place on YouTube where we want to share the latest scientific insights that point to the metaphysics of analytic idealism. Welcome to this Q&A session. It's the second recording with Bernardo. I think we did one about a month ago now.
About that.
And thanks so much for all your comments and engagement. It's really great to see just how people respond and also in a very engaged way, and I really love that. So a lot of questions already were put in the comments to the previous video, also the one on the books we did, the book club we started. Those videos will be coming up also, but today we're sitting down again, Bernardo, to answer some questions from viewers. But I thought first, as this community is growing, and nice to just share what's happening at the moment at the Essentia Foundation and also a bit larger in the community of consciousness research. So yeah, maybe just good to share what you've been up to the last month.
We are working on several books, more books than we already announced. So there are more books coming down the pipeline. Some great stuff, some great books. One of them is probably going to be a much more worked out version of an essay we published on the website, and which has become our most read essay in all the 3.5 years we've been doing this. So there will be a book coming out on that. There is a lot of work happening in the background with academic collaborations. We are collaborating with different academic institutes, maybe sponsoring some positions for them or opening some positions with us, but largely for research as well in the areas of neuroscience of consciousness and foundations of physics. So lots going on in there as well. Hopefully there will be something very nice to announce in the coming couple of months.
Yeah, you mentioned an article sort of going viral. I mean, viral in our scene is very niche, but still, it was a very popular article published about entropy. Entropy is in the eye of the beholder was its title. So nice if you can briefly unpack sort of the core idea of that essay.
Okay. One of the key laws between quote, laws in physics mean regularities of natural behavior. One of the key laws in physics is the second law of thermodynamics, which basically says the states of nature tend to become more disorderly. And it's very difficult to interpret that theory in a way that is always consistent with empirical evidence, because when the universe began, there was only disorder. And the force of gravity is what amplified small quantum fluctuations at the fabric of reality and created structure, complexity, by attracting matter to this point where these quantum fluctuations led to a little higher concentration of matter. The more matter you have, the more that attracts more matter. So the thing has a positive feedback loop. And that's how we got galaxies, stars, planets, moons, and life, ultimately. So the early history of the universe was the history of decreasing entropy. A universe that began uniformly, had a break in asymmetry, and gravity then amplified those quantum fluctuations and led to structure. But now we think that structure will, over time, dissipate, and everything will become disorderly again. There will be no structure, there will be no complexity, there will be no life. So we tend to say today, well, no, you can break the second law of thermodynamics locally, but not globally. So life is a break of the second law of thermodynamics, but it's a local break. It uses energy from beyond itself in order to maintain that break of the law. At a global level, everything is tending to disorder. The problem is that how do you define disorder? It's very difficult to have an objective definition of disorder, a certain organization of states that you can say it's disorderly from every point of view. Mm-hmm. Like we say, if you mix coffee and milk, they will mix in such a way that you can't unmix them. Because if you put coffee on one half of the cup and milk on the other half of the cup, they will start separately, but then if you remove the division between the two halves, they will mix. And that will be more disorderly compared to one half being milk and one half being coffee. But that definition is based on what we consider to be the middle. Where do we draw the boundary? If you draw the boundary around the molecules of coffee as to unify them and exclude the molecules of milk, they will be completely separate just by defining the boundary in a different way. And who defines the boundary? Well, we define the boundary based on the information we have access to. So entropy may be in the eye of the beholder. It may be an artifact of our dashboard of dials, our perception, and the information we can access through that. The information that our dissociated individual consciousness can access through its own dials, its own measurements of the world. It may not be something that is inherent to reality. And if this turns out to be true, oh, it flips our understanding of nature upside down. It's amazing,
because it's also the second law of thermodynamics is one that is, a lot of people know about that. They sort of get the main idea of entropy and we just think of it as a given, you know, but it's, hearing you talk about that line being drawn around, it makes me think of information theory. So Shannon, I mean, you can think about entropy as a decreasing, am I saying it right now? Decreasing amount of information of a system, or the amount of states possible. It has to do with information theory in a sense, or?
There is Shannon entropy, but it's defined mainly for communication. So it's not, I wouldn't apply that to an understanding of the second law of thermodynamics. It has practical applications in communication.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, noise would be like high entropy, like just no signal.
So for Shannon, if there are no patterns you can't predict from what you see, that you can infer from what you see, then there is high entropy because there is low compressibility, and therefore you need a higher bandwidth channel to convey that information. But if there are patterns in a message you want to send that you can discern, then you can compress that message, and then you need a lower bandwidth channel to transmit the same message, because you can compress it before transmitting and decompress it on the other end. So Shannon's idea of information and entropy is applicable to communications. There are efforts to apply it more broadly in information theory, but I would be cautious about that. It's not something that you can just verbatim apply unthinkingly. You have to think about what you're doing.
Yeah. But it does, I mean, when we think about life, we tend to think it's an anomaly, right? Life fighting off entropy. As we're sitting here, we're fighting off entropy, and we create, of course, disorder around us. And the cat's fighting off entropy. But this would really flip it around. So it could mean, if this is true, that there is just an order that we cannot perceive, and it is becoming, the universe is becoming increasingly ordered. Is that right? Could that be the case?
I think it could, but if this idea of entropy being in the eye of the beholder, if this is correct, I think the most parsimonious conclusion is that the very idea of order and disorder is relative to the observer. It's not something that inherent in nature. It's not something objective in nature. It has to do with our own perception and how we filter out information from the world in order to maximize our chances of survival. So entropy, and whether the universe has more or less order, it's an artifact of life. It's an artifact of perception, of the information we are given access to through the screen of perception in order to survive. In other words, it's a relative, relational, biased thing. It's not an inherent characteristic of nature. Nature is what it is, and as far as information or structure or entropy is concerned, I think the conclusion I would extract, if this hypothesis is true, is that whatever structure nature has, it has always had and will always have. It's not changing. It's not a time. It's not a function of time. It's a function of being. I think that would be the conclusion.
Yeah, what I take away from it is that if we have that dashboard metaphor that we try to measure or sort of map the order or chaos of our universe, but in doing so we have to model it, and at the moment our models become very grainy because we don't see any signals, so to speak, anymore. We then say there's high entropy. Yeah. But this whole essay goes against that idea and says you don't know. I mean, you are just modeling it, and you are just trying. Yeah. I like that idea. Yeah.
And it dovetails with analytic idealism very well, because under analytic idealism, the physical world is a result of measurement. It is the result of our probing the real objective states of the world, which are themselves not physical. The physical world under analytic idealism is our dashboard representation of the sky outside, but it isn't the sky outside. And therefore entropy applies to the dashboard, not to the sky outside. So it dovetails very nicely.
I really like it, and I think it's great that there's a book coming, so that's already set, that there's a book being written.
There is an agreement with the author that we try to do that. Of course, we only know when it's written. Until it's written in our hands, we can't know for sure. But we would really like to promote this idea, foment more discussion around it.
Yeah, that'd be very nice. So we released a couple of weeks ago a video, and that's my fault in trying to sort of let the YouTube algorithms pick up on us. I proposed a rather bold title, "You Have No Free Will," and that's great. And we got a lot of comments on that video, and it also left me puzzled, Bernardo. We talked about free will for more than an hour, and it really gave me a lot of insights, and I really lived with it this month. But I just think nice to also give you the opportunity to maybe bring a bit of nuance to what you said, in a sense that a lot of people think, is this guy nice and we have no free will, because I saw him previously saying that we have, so people are just
confused.
A bit confused, yeah.
You can see in the comments that some people basically just read the title. And
exactly, that's really true. They didn't go into the nuance of it.
Yeah. My key point is that there is no distinction between free will and determinism. We think there is because of our conceptual confusion. At the level of what truly exists, there is no such distinction. What nature decides to do is both what it desperately wants to do and what it must do. What nature does is a result of what nature is. Nature wills what it wills because it is what it is. And it can't will otherwise without being something that it is not. Yeah. But of course, it is what it is, so it wills what it does. There is no external environment beyond nature to impose choices on nature. What nature chooses to do comes out of itself. Therefore, it comes out of its being. It's a result of what it is. So nature wills what it must will given what it is. But it does make choices. It couldn't make different choices because it isn't different. Nature is what it is and not something else. It does make choices, but its choices are a direct consequence of what it is. Yeah. So from that perspective, what nature wills is what it must. And what nature must is exactly what it wills. So there is no distinction at the level of nature between free will and determinism. And that's why we can both say, you have free will, because you're a part of nature, and nature has free will. But why does nature have free will? Because it's the same as determinism, and determinism is true. So by the same token, you could also say, everything is deterministic. Why? Because free will is true, but free will is the same thing as determinism. So everything is deterministic. That was the point that I was trying to get across. Of course, we all make choices. We are parts of nature. We make choices every day, thousands of choices every day, starting from whether you touch the ground with your left or your right foot the moment you step out of bed. The idea of determinism does not deny the obvious empirical fact that we are always making choices. What it denies is the abstraction that we call the could have been. I could have chosen differently. Then I would say you could only have chosen differently if you were different. But you were what you were. Yeah. Nature was what it was. So the could have been is an abstraction, and I think it's a fantasy.
And it helps me in a sense that the opposite of determinism is randomness, right? And as you put in your essay, that is not what we mean when we say our free will. You not say it's random. No, you mean it is determined, but it's not determined by... It's determined by what you prefer to be determined by, right? That's what you like to think. I want it to be determined about my wish to sit down here with Bernardo made me sit here down with Bernardo. But then again, it is determined, right? It's not random. So that's also where you run into philosophical problems. So I think analytically your point is very clear. I think just psychologically, we left the conversation saying that, I think we quoted Fred Matzer, and I got a question also. Tom Le Royan, 2231. Allow yourself to be played by life in the universe, which is an organism where each contribution is important. So this holistic organism, superorganism. But can you choose to disallow also? I mean, can you choose to disallow being played by the universe? That's sort of what rang with me.
A lot of people are not allowing themselves to be played by the universe. That, too, is a direct result of what the universe is, because those people are part of the universe. So the universe sometimes disallows itself to be played by itself. That's part of the natural unfolding of what is, what exists. It is such that this contradiction can emerge. Nature is sometimes self-contradictory. This is empirically obvious, right? And not only from a mathematical perspective, from those theorems of the 1930s, but empirically obvious as well. So the point is not that you don't choose. We all choose all the time. The point is there is no could have been. The could have been is a human fantasy. Again, the point is that everything is ultimately determined, because the people who are very much into free will, they would also reject the notion that one's choices are random, the throw of dice. There is no meaning in that. If your choices are random, what meaning is in there? So people who are after free will because they associate with meaning, they themselves will immediately acknowledge that what they mean by it is not randomness. Yeah. Therefore, every choice is determined. The thing is, the human intuition in this regard says the following: my choices are free if they are determined by me and not by nature at large. What people who are into free will, what they mean by a free choice is that the choice they make, let's say my free will choice is a choice I make, so it is determined, but it's determined by me. It's determined by that which I identify with. I don't identify with my brain activity. I have never seen it. I identify with my conscious inner life. I identify with my preferences, my tastes, my goals, things that I experience from within. So if my choices are determined by my preferences, my tastes, my goals, then they are free-willed choices. Now, there are two arguments why even this doesn't hold water. One is, there is no you separate from nature. A you separate from nature or a me separate from nature is merely nominal. It's an artifact of language. It follows the structure of language, but the structure of reality is not the structure of language. Language is defined for convenience, for communication, and not to capture and reflect the ontological structure of nature. That's not what language is about. So there is no you separate from nature. There is no me separate from nature. So there is no choice I make that is determined exclusively by the linguistic me. Because the me is just molecules in the ocean of nature. It's determined by nature. Another answer is, even if your choices are free in the sense of being always determined by your will, by your preferences, by your plans, who determines your will, your preferences, and your plans? Is it you? Of course not. If you could choose what you want, you would be the happiest person in the world. Whatever your circumstances, you would simply choose to want precisely the circumstances you happen to have. We don't determine those. So our will is literally not free in the sense that we can't just change our wills. We fall in love for who we fall in love. We don't choose who we fall in love with. Otherwise, we would all fall in love with the person who is available. Yeah. That's not how reality works. We don't choose our tastes. We don't choose our preferences. We don't choose even what we want to do in our lives. These things are chosen by nature.
Yeah, and I think
so
then
what is this business of free will? What do people mean?
I'm starting to get you, and I'm just afraid that this will trigger again the same comment. But that's not a problem. I have something I think experientially to bring in. I mean, after a video, I tried. It rang with me, right? So I tried to just live it a bit for a month now, I'd say. And what I tried doing is stop focusing thinking attention on all the choices I can or cannot make in my life, but just more consciously be aware of how life unfolds, right? Just how and it relaxed. It can be, I had moments, not all, but I had moments where it felt extremely relaxing to just see, okay, this is what's now being played out and what I can bring to it, but I know that's maybe not the right word. It's just conscious attention to just see and experience it, and that sort of got more value, valuable for me than the whole idea of me making the right or wrong decision. So it's also a shift, I think at least, from focusing on free will and making decisions towards more consciously being present in the moment, right? And that helped me. I really like that.
I can share how I apply this to my own life. I'm not saying that this is, I can't make an objective argument that this is the way to go. It's just my own way of living my life. For me, every choice I make, and we all make choices. Determinism does not say that we don't make choices. It's silly. We are always making choices. Every choice I make for me, is a moment of self-discovery. It's a moment when I reflect and think, I am the entity who is disposed to make this choice right now. Every single choice I make is a moment of self-discovery. It's an opportunity for self-insight. It's a revelation, a continuing revelation of what I am, what I truly am, which is not Bernardo Kastrup. And that's how I see meaning in the future. It's the first time that nature is discovering that it has those dispositions. It is the thing that makes those choices. Whether those choices are good choices or bad choices, particularly the bad ones tend to be more meaningful. When you make a self-destructive choice, reflect upon it. You are the thing that has the disposition to make that choice. I've made many self-destructive choices. For a period of 15 years, I was basically making self-destructive choices. So going forward, this notion that free will and determinism are the same thing, they are not distinct. They're not even compatible, because for two things to be compatible, they first need to be two things. And what I'm saying is that it isn't two things. The first thing it gave me was this idea that going forward, every choice is a moment of self-discovery. And going backwards, the notion that there is no could have been eliminates regret from your life.
That's amazing, yeah, that's amazing. And I think also, just to people watching this, if you have like intellectual objections, please comment and we can further discuss it. But I'd suggest a little test, just try and live it for a while and see how it feels. And that of course is determined that you're now watching. And that's where it gets crazy, right? But I really mean it. I mean, to approach it from that experiential route. Yeah. Bernardo, we had a question coming in and that I found important, or just more a remark on the 10 books video we did, the books you suggested to me that I'm now reading, that these are all men. And someone asking, are there any books by female authors, and if not, I mean, how do you reflect on that?
The books I suggested are a reflection of my own journey. And I resonated more with those books without thinking about were they written by women or not. I could have easily mentioned books by Marie-Louise von Franz, who was a student of Jung, and perhaps the top Jungian after Jung himself. But I didn't because of my own personal history. I can assure you that this is not a reflection of misogyny. It's not. It may be a reflection of our cultural biases in the past. A lot more men published books in the past than women. But one of my favorite books, that I didn't happen to mention because it's not a particular philosophy aligned with idealism, and we wanted to pick books about idealism, but there is a book by Salomé about Nietzsche that I think is the most insightful book into Nietzsche's personality ever written. It's much more insightful than Nietzsche himself. Salomé was...
They had a relationship, right? Or
well, Nietzsche wished that they had a romantic relationship. They never had a romantic relationship. Nietzsche thought they did, but from Salomé's perspective, that never happened. They were friends for many months.
Oh, did she have a relationship with Rilke, I think? Or could that be?
And much later, she was
Rainer Maria Rilke, the poet.
Rilke's lover.
Yeah.
The name Rainer was chosen by Salomé. Rilke's original name, I forgot what it was, but Salomé thought it was not manly enough. But Salomé was much older than Rilke by the time they had a relationship. Salomé was also a student of Freud, made several discoveries in the Freudian psychology of sexuality. So she was an intellectual heavyweight in her own right, but her insight into Nietzsche was far superior than Nietzsche's own insights into himself. Nietzsche was notoriously bad into self-awareness in that sense. He could reflect deeply on the subjects that he was engaged with. But insight into himself, he had little. He never noticed something that is obvious in him, which is he had a tendency to attack precisely the people that most influenced him. The people he owed most to, those were the people he would viciously attack. He viciously attacked Wagner. He viciously attacked Schopenhauer. And those were the people who influenced him the most, who gave him most, the people who he owed most to. Salomé had profound insight over him. So her book called Nietzsche, I think I could have put it in any list, but it was a list about idealist books. Yeah. Well, Salomé didn't write about it. We don't have, in the history of idealist literature, there aren't many women, and that's a reflection of our prejudices in the past.
Yeah.
And I think that's about all there is to it.
Yeah, I think so too. But I do think that there could be much value in more female authors, more female thinking, though saying this sounds always a bit controversial, but what do you think about that? I mean, as a woman, you just have a different experience of the world purely by being a woman and not a man, and that somehow must influence how you, of course, perceive the world and think about it and write about it. So it could also be of much value to idealism. And I also say this reading Jung, and I want to dive deeper in another video with you about that, but Jung talking about sort of the feminine and the masculine also in Christianity, for instance, and there I also see it, right? If we just zoom out and not reflecting on a level of gender, but more on a sort of archetypal way, what are your thoughts there, more sort of on the female and the masculine, feminine, masculine archetype?
Because until very recently, historically seen, we essentially didn't publish philosophy done by women. I think historically we've lost half the human perspective. We've ignored half the human perspective, because I agree with you, women seem to have, I don't have access to that, so I can't say that for sure, but I think I'm 99% confident based on my experience of how women live life, that they have a different and incredibly important perspective. I can be more specific. My partner, Claudia, she doesn't need philosophy. She doesn't need anybody to elaborate an idealism for her conceptually and convince her conceptually. Why? Because she lives it. She lives it. Sometimes I'm telling things to her and she listens very politely, very carefully, and I see in her eyes that in her mind it's like, duh. Know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, of course. Isn't this self-evident? Why do you even bother, saying this? And I find it fascinating. She influenced a lot, particularly one of my books, More Than Allegory. Her symbolic, direct way of relating to nature without conceptual intermediation. I was fascinated by that.
And does that overlap with sort of right hemisphere in sort of Ian McGilchrist's sort of way of looking at the world, left-right hemisphere?
It's not literally left and right hemisphere. We are talking about statistics, and it's a metaphor, left-right hemisphere. Yeah. But given the metaphor, yeah, it definitely relates to that. I mean, I don't remember being a woman. Perhaps what I truly am is everybody, right? And the same applies to everybody else. But in my dissociative state right now, while I'm alive, I don't have direct access to the woman's perspective. But I keep on getting tantalizing clues that tell me, and I don't want to sound the opposite of a misogynist now, because I think nature is complementary in this regard, but the grass is always greener at the neighbors, right? So from my male perspective, I'm jealous of the kind of access they seem to have. It's more direct, it's less laborious, it's less cumbersome, it's more natural, elegant. Yeah, it's less plagued by self-doubt, by You know, when you stick with your thought and you never come to an end, you get into those conceptual loops. They don't seem to have that. So yeah, from my biased male perspective, the grass is greener on their side.
Yeah, but it transcends gender in a sense, right? We just did a video on Heart and Mind, sort of our origin story as Essentia Foundation, a story about you and Fred Matzer, where I thought Fred being sort of the heart, you could say the feminine, the more intuitive, and he of course is also a man. So it also has to do with energies, or how to say that, but I mean like aspects.
Yeah.
Whereas you stand sort of on towards one spectrum, sort of. But
yeah, I am unbalanced. You know, Jung would say that you know, the goal of life is individuation, and individuation entails folding in all the opposites into that which you are. So it entails folding in the feminine aspect as well. That comes with maturity. Now, Fred has that. I don't think he always had that. It's important to keep the context and the history in sight. We shouldn't get depressed because we are not where Fred is. Fred is 78 years old now. He has had a rich, intense life that led him to be where he is now. That doesn't mean that it's hopeless for us. When we get to 78, we have a shot at being where he is. Maybe not all the way where he is, because he's an exceptional person, but being closer to that. So Fred has had the benefit of time. He has paid attention to his life, which is something that we can't say for many other people. He has had that impulse to pay attention to what was happening to his life, which helped him be where he is now in full awareness and not blindly. But we have a shot. I have a shot. I tell that to myself.
you do have, and you already had your own journey, right? You said that had I met you like 10, 15 years ago, it would be a lot worse.
It would be, oh, jeez. Claudia, my partner, says it to me. Because I tell her stories, and you know, she sees photos, and she knows the context of my life, and she says, "Oh, had I met you then I would not be with you."
becoming more feminine every day. I have a fun question. Someone asked about music. S. Kempson asked, "I'd love to hear Bernardo's take on music. Many NDEs, or near-death experience accounts, have reported experiencing music, but can music exist as an experience in mind at large that is supposedly outside/beyond time? I ask this because music, I would pose, is bound by the concept of time, notes, chords, rhythm, changing from something to something else. I'm very puzzled by this. How can such a time-bound concept of music be experienced in a timeless realm?" Music is interesting. Yeah, it's true. It needs time.
Life needs time.
Right, that's true also, yeah.
Everything that exists in extension, in time and space, under idealism, Kantian and Schopenhauer idealism, under Western idealism, and I would say even under Eastern idealism, everything that appears in time and space in extension is a projection of something that in itself is not extended. Think of it as a shadow. Your shadow is two-dimensional, your shadow on the ground. It's a projection of the three-dimensional thing that you are. You don't exist in the two-dimensional world of the shadows. Yet the shadows only exist because of you. So a shadow is a projection of something that is itself not a shadow. You are not a shadow when you're projecting a shadow. So everything that exists in space-time is a projection of something that itself is not in space-time, something that is categorically different than extended stuff in space-time. So although music, as shadow, can only exist in space-time, that which projects music in space-time, the result of which we call music, that thing that projects is not in space-time. It's not extended. And it exists, just like you exist, although you don't belong in the world of shadows. The real reality is not extended. Its projections are extended. So the interesting question here is to ask yourself, if music is a projection of something, what is that something whose projection is music? And it surely has to do with rhythm and flow and harmony. That rhythm and flow and harmony of music that we love, and for which there probably is no evolutionary advantage. It's something that is inherent to consciousness. Why do we love music? Why are certain things in music dissonant and ugly, and other things harmonious and delightful? Why do we resonate with some of it and not the rest? Is it because of an evolutionary advantage? It doesn't seem to be the case. Right? From a materialist perspective, it's a great mystery. It seems to be arbitrary. From an idealist perspective, if all there is consciousness, then consciousness has certain archetypes. It has certain natural templates of movement, of excitation, of behavior, of expression. So you could say consciousness has some inherent templates of rhythm and flow and harmony. And it recognizes itself in its projection when it listens to music. So music is saying something about consciousness in its most foundational manifestation.
That's interesting, right? It makes
That's
me think,
Schopenhauer's perspective, not mine.
Yeah, and it also makes me think, but I forgot sort of the core ideas, only sort of the really, really big idea. A book by Stephen Alexander, a physicist. We've met him. He did some great work, a paper on the self-learning of the universe. Yeah, he's great. He did a book on the jazz of physics. He's also a jazz musician, and then he takes it as a metaphor, but in that book, he stretches that metaphor so far, applying it to his deep understanding of physics as the universe being this sort of John Coltrane solo of improvisation. It's just amazing. I mean, the planets have vibration. I mean, you know more about this, but if you just look at sort of the music as frequencies and planets having sort of the motion of planets and their frequencies, you could look at the whole universe as a big orchestra sort of.
Nature has rhythm and flow, absolutely.
Yeah, it's amazing.
When I was young, I was working at CERN, helping develop the data acquisition system for the Atlas detector, part of the Large Hadron Collider. One of the two detectors that discovered the Higgs boson 11 years ago. But I was there like 96, 97. We were building that stuff, early days. And I was not interested in that because of the Higgs boson. Because we knew the Higgs boson existed. We had already measured it. We just didn't have statistics.
Is that so? Yeah. That was like the common understanding there? We know it already?
Well, I have to be careful in how far I state it. I suspected that we had measured the Higgs boson. There were events, we call them events. There were events produced by the older accelerator called the LEP, which was replaced by the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider. The LEP had events that were consistent with the Higgs boson. So most people who were there, we sort of, are we doing this to find the Higgs boson? No, the Higgs boson is there, all right. So we all had different motivations. My motivation was I wanted to find SUSY, supersymmetry. Supersymmetry is music in physics. I can't explain to you why I associate supersymmetry with music.
Perfect harmony. It's like
Perfect
Bach.
harmony.
It's Bach.
Yeah, exactly. It's the allegro of Bach's third Brandenburg Concerto. That's what supersymmetry is. It's the allegro movement of the third Brandenburg Concerto. I can't conceptually tell you why I think that, but it is that. That's what supersymmetry is.
And where are we on SUSY? I mean, is that still
it's not there at any energy level that we can realistically produce to measure it. So it's one of my youth's disappointments.
But that's your association talking about music and the universe. And,
Well, what appears to us as music can appear to us in math, can appear to us in personal relationships, can appear to us when we are making love. It's a reflection of the inherent, primordial, archetypal rhythm and flow templates of nature.
And what I also really like about it, if you compare it to math, if you say like you're just a mathematics metaphor of looking at the universe versus the music one, is that music is, we all know, it is, the value of it is in the process. I mean, it's not when a piece is finished that you can tell, yeah, it was a beautiful, no, it has its beauty the moment you listen, and it's in a progression, it keeps on moving, and when it stops, and then it's over. Whereas how we usually think, I mean, at least in mathematics, for instance, you think about equations and you want the right outcomes, and then the beauty comes. At least that's how I look at it, and then
Oh, I completely understand what you're saying, and of course you're right. I just wanted to add to it one thing. Do you know what Euler's equation is in mathematics?
I think you tried explaining it to me previously, but please do it again, because...
Euler's equation relates three constants in mathematics that were derived for absolutely completely different reasons. I'm not going to get into the mathematical details, but the fact that those three constants whose meaning is derived from entirely and utterly, completely different concepts, like pi is from a circle, e is based on natural logarithms, they're completely different things. The fact that they come together in that way in Euler's equation, it's a miracle. If you understand what that is, there is a high chance you start crying. I cried.
Seriously, yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah, Euler's equation is just, and it's simple, it's not complicated. Maybe you can...
I have to try.
Put it on when you edit it, put it on the screen.
Let's do that. Let's do that, yeah. But
Euler's equation is a Bach symphony.
What I always think with math is that it seems to me as, if we again compare it to music, it would be like a grand maestro of an orchestra being able to read the partiture of a piece and hear the music already, right? He has to develop this skill by reading the notes and projecting.
Yeah.
And to me, it seems as if math has the same, sort of needs the same skill level as compared to just listening to a great piece of music. It needs you to be able to read the symbols and sort of play it out somehow. If you say the beauty, if it makes you cry, it's almost as if you can play a piece in your head.
Yeah, you just have to get used to it. Yeah. I don't think it requires tremendous skill. It's a matter of being used to it. Yeah. So the translation is automatic. Yeah. Like when a conductor is reading a partiture, he doesn't have to explicitly think about what each notation symbol, how does it translate to a note. It's like reading English. Yeah. You don't need to associate the letters one by one. You're used to it, so the translation is automatic. Yeah. Euler's equation just requires that. It requires that you get used to mathematical language, just as you're used to English. Everybody can get used to English. It doesn't require skill. It just requires that you are used to it and some habituation to it. It's like riding a bike. You don't think about every muscle movement you make, you just ride it. So mathematics is the same. If you're used enough to it, and when you studied what I did for as long as I did, and I can't help but get used to certain things. So when you see Euler's equation, your first reaction is, this can't be true. And then you see the proof, you see the derivation. And as the derivation is unfolding, your eyes start opening. It is true. It's a miracle. Wow. It's a bloody miracle. How can this be? How can this possibly be? Right, I get to keep
again. Yeah. It also makes me think that the now famous movie Oppenheimer. I think it's Bohr saying to Oppenheimer, "Can you hear the music? Can you hear the music?" Right?
Yeah, if you look at Euler's equation, can you hear the music? Yeah. Because music is the same archetypal thing that is in a Bach symphony. You see that in mathematics sometimes, or in making love.
In one of our previous conversations, I made a rookie mistake, Bernardo. Namely, you handed me like on a golden platter, like an amazing subject to go into for another hour, and I just left it like it was nothing. And that was the moment we talked about UAPs, the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena, and people responded, "Oh, Hans should have really asked," and they're absolutely right. So this is like textbook interview mistake not to go into something as interesting as that. But you said that in the coming decades, that will be one of the main developments. So apart from idealism becoming more mainstream, recognizing the fact that UAPs are real, and we have to just get used to that. So people just want to hear more about it, so please share your thoughts here.
What we call UAPs today, we used to call other things.
UFOs.
In the past. Angels and demons, fairies, ghosts, mythology the world over talks about those things. And that's why I suggested Jacques Vallée's book, Passport to Magonia, because he explains this. he explains that all of these mythical traditions are talking about the same thing, and these things appear according to the vocabulary of the time. The vocabulary of, of Celt mythology 1,000 years ago was the vocabulary of little people dressed in green clothes, like little soldiers. What is the vocabulary today? Well, aliens from other planets and technology, that's the vocabulary of today. The phenomenon reflects back to us the vocabulary, and when I say vocabulary, I mean it more than literally. The vocabulary in the sense of the conceptual context of our times. The phenomenon reflects back to us our own conceptual vocabulary. And that's why today it appears like spaceships, highly technological spaceships from other planets. But the phenomenon itself, as Jacques Vallée wrote in his book Confrontations, it's a part of nature. And it has always been here. It's earthbound as much as it's spacebound, probably more.
But does it differ in its form only because it has a different cultural context now? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
So we now really see unidentified anomalous phenomena, let's say just spaceships, because culture, as culture, we're sort of see movies about stuff like this. Is that it? Or?
It reflects back to us the conceptual armor of our times. In the late 19th century, there was a flap or a series of UAP appearances in the US. They appeared as air balloons, dirigibles, which was the thing at the time. Since the late 18th century, air balloons have been around. So those were airships. They appeared as airships. In the Middle Ages, they appeared as flying cannons. At the time of Alexander the Great and the Persian Wars, they appeared as flying shields. Because shields was the thing you had at the time. Now, part of it has to do with how we describe things, our cultural references, the references we use to describe things. But another part of it seems to reflect the real appearance of the thing, how it actually appears, not only to us, but to everybody. Yeah. In 1917, during the Fatima phenomenon in Portugal, when the church says the Virgin Mary appeared and the sun fell from the sky, look at this vocabulary. The sun fell from the sky, even though the actual sun could be seen off to the side. But that's the vocabulary of the time. Today you would say it was a spherical spaceship that descended from the sky. We wouldn't say the sun fell from the sky. The phenomenon seems to reflect back to us, not only conceptually, but in its real appearance. Something about the conceptual vocabulary of our times.
But that doesn't make it unreal. It has a sort of, it is objective, because I think that you have to clarify. People watching, you're not saying here that thereby it's imaginary.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that it's a reverie of a person. I think there is an obvious physical aspect to it. These things can be measured through radar reflections. They can be photographed like they have been. They can be filmed. You can get energy measurements of the energy output that they put out. There's a site in Norway called Hesdalen. It's a valley in Norway where these things appear with such regularity that it gave time to scientists to put up all kinds of sensors and measurement instruments, because they knew the stuff would appear. And there are all kinds of measurements. There's film, there's photo, there's radar, energy measurement, there are all kinds of things. So they have an obvious, objective, physical phase to them. But they mix the physical phase with the mental phase. They don't make a distinction between the two. It's as much a mental projection as it is an objective physical thing. Now, which metaphysics allows for that? Materialism? No. Idealism? Oh, yeah. Because under idealism, physicality is itself a mental process out there, but at least it's mental. It's much easier to think of an objective mental process out there modulating your own internal mental processes, because it's mental to mental, than to imagine that something that is only physical and completely separate from the mental out there can modulate your consciousness. Why would it? Under idealism, oh, it can. It's a mental process out there, a mental process in here. They modulate one another. There is an interference pattern arising. It's no problem. It's completely rational, and we can account for it. And that's why in the world of UAPs, there is the tremendous attention to idealism today.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating.
Take any big name in that field today, and I can tell you that person, whoever big name you pick, is very aware of idealism.
And to just name someone, I'm not familiar in that space, so I have to research it.
Jacques Vallée is aware of idealism.
Yeah.
I don't want to mention the latest names. I say Jacques Vallée because it's clear in his writings, but I'm not going to quote. I can promise you everybody's aware of idealism.
So now we are at a congressional hearing in the US, sort of just really showing that there is a lot of evidence, and but from a sort of a metaphysical perspective, do you think there has been a political or a scientific pushback because these phenomena would mean an anomaly to our metaphysics, materialism, because we see objects that are just violate, in clear sight, violate our laws of physics. So that, of course, would be to physicists just...
If only they violated only our laws of physics, they violate our logic, they violate our metaphysics, they violate our entire story of what reality is. And that's the discombobulating aspect of the phenomenon. It's probably the purpose of the phenomenon. It's, in my view, I know Jacques is divided 50-50 between it being an artificial phenomenon or a natural phenomenon. It could be both. There is evidence for both. I tend to the natural phenomenon. I tend to think that the consciousness of nature is such that it produces this kind of feedback mechanism when our models of reality are becoming too stagnant, when we get caught in a local minimum. In optimization theory, when you're trying to reduce the cost of something, optimize for some variable, you try to reduce the cost of something, but sometimes there is a little low in the cost, but if you go high again, then there is an even bigger low down here. But when we get caught in the local minimum here, whatever direction we go, the cost increases. So we tend to get stuck in the local minimum because we think things are getting worse. Well, they are. But if you let them to continue to get worse, after a while, the cost goes even further down. I think UAPs are a natural phenomenon, a natural feedback mechanism in nature, whose effect, it may not be deliberate, but the effect at the end is to dislodge us from a local minimum, to not allow us to get stuck in a useful but ultimately wrong narrative of reality. So things get a little worse up front, but then our understanding deepens a lot further. But we need to be dislodged from that local minimum. And nature seems to be a feedback mechanism, seems to have that feedback mechanism built in. Now, it could also be a deliberate thing done by other dissociated consciousnesses that are non-human. And the latest evidence from David Grush and others seems to suggest that there is that too, a deliberate attempt by non-human intelligence to do something. We don't know what it is. It could be that both are true. And if they are both true, it could be they're both the same.
They overlap. I'd say they overlap in a sense. Right?
They seem to overlap, but it's unclear whether we are talking about the same thing in every case. There could be a non-human intelligence thing going on, and there could be a natural mental feedback mechanism in nature, built into nature, that dislodges us from local minima.
But it's interesting because questions came in, especially how you regard this from an idealist perspective, and you're saying it could be nature's way to push us towards a more, towards an idealist metaphysics in a sense. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think nature is committed to idealism.
Yeah, I know.
I think nature is what it is, and it's not necessarily aware of what it is. But simply by being what it is, certain feedback mechanisms can be part of it. I mean, there are feedback mechanisms in all of nature. All of nature is a great feedback mechanism. Now, if the air temperature increases too much, the pressure increases, air flows, and you attract a storm. So if it is too sunny, you get the storm at the end of the day. That's a feedback mechanism. Nature is filled with feedback mechanisms, sort of the homeostasis mechanisms that sort of try to bring back balance. It could be that there is one of these very mental feedback mechanisms that when you get stuck too long in a local minimum, there is an effect. And that effect, not in a deliberate way, but in a natural way, dislodges you from that local minimum.
And this is also Jung, right? It as a
Yeah.
sort of feedback mechanism of the psyche.
Yeah, Jung saw UAPs or UFOs in his time as partly synchronistic events happening in the world out there, so really objective, and partly projections. So for Jung, fundamentally, UAP is an objective event arising from the collective unconscious. That's why it can be measured in radar, because the collective unconscious presents itself to us as what we call the physical world. That's the appearance of the collective unconscious. So there is a real objective event, a mental event, but an objective, external event out there, beyond us. But we then clothe our perception of that event with our own projections, the symbolism of our own times, of our own culture, our own conceptual dictionary. And that's why it appears to us differently in different points in history.
Okay.
It's an objective event, but we clothe it through projection. That was Jung's theory. I think the latest development, I mean, if it turns out that David Grush is correct, that the people he talked to didn't lie to him, I have no doubt he didn't lie. I have no doubt of that. But whether the people who told him this stuff, whether they were telling the truth, I mean, there is a possibility that they were not telling the truth. If they were, and there are craft locked in hangars for the past 70 years, and there are biologicals in a freezer for the past several decades, then this suggests that there is more to the phenomenon than just this sort of external psychological thing going on. There is something with a very stable physical phase. And then the question is, are we talking about one and the same phenomenon here? Or are we talking about completely different things that only overlap insofar as both seem to be mysterious? It could be the latter. It could be that there are two completely different things. I don't know.
Super interesting, yeah. Not the last word on this one. At least for me, it's very interesting to follow this whole topic. And there's also a political side to it. I'm thinking about a political scientist, Alexander Wendt. He's pretty renowned in the field of international relations, but he thinks of the UFO and the state as sort of that there's also states have a political agenda, not to, I mean, if you would acknowledge the fact that this is real, it would be something that could unify humanity, and some people don't want that. So you can also think about it politically, the fact that it's not acknowledged. Fitz Bianco Onero, HX1JI, asks us about NDEs being the closest thing to breaking through dissociation, as you have mentioned previously, I think, Bernardo. Kastrup states that NDEs are the result of the brain stopping to work and people breaking through dissociation clashes with the fact that during an NDE, people recognize family members and recognize themselves as individuals with an identity and a past. So this is a question about your whole notion of biological life and dissociation, and if there are other layers, I think, of dissociation, or if one directly returns to mind at large, so to speak.
Yeah. So the position I normally hold and talk about is that biology, life, is what the dissociation in this field of subjectivity that underlies all nature, that's what dissociation looks like. And that's why we seem to have a separate sense of identity, separate from the rest of nature, because life is what dissociation looks like. We are dissociated. And therefore, the end of life, death, is then the end of the dissociation. Yeah. And then there is no separate me anymore. We return to what we have always been, which is nature itself, that field of subjectivity. Is it technically coherent to imagine that there can be a hierarchy of dissociative states? That when you die, the bottom level dissociation ends, but then you fall back into another level of dissociation. It is technically coherent, it is conceivable. The question is, do we have any reasons to entertain that hypothesis empirically? I don't think we do, because there is nothing visible that could correspond to a dissociation left working and active after we die. So I don't think that's the most likely or the most parsimonious hypothesis that we fall back into another level of dissociation, even though that could be the case. Now, of course, the questioner would immediately confront me with the evidence of NDEs. And although that evidence is not what we would call scientifically controlled evidence, it's what we would call anecdotal evidence. And by anecdotal, I don't mean to disparage it. I only mean that it's evidence not collected under controlled conditions. That's all I mean by it. I think anecdotal evidence is worth considering. So what do I make of that? When Anita Goswami, when she had her NDE, she met her dead father. But she also says that what she meant by meeting her dead father was different than just seeing him and shaking hands with him. She proceeds to explain that what it felt like to meet her dead father was to become her dead father, was to be her dead father. That's the sense in which she met her dead father. It's not the sense that I'm meeting you now, it's the sense of being within you and experience what it is like to be you. Is that compatible with idealism? Of course it is. Under idealism, life is what the dissociation looks like. So the end of life is the end of the dissociative boundary. It's the end of the process that actively enforces inferential isolation, that actively enforces the seeming cognitive separation from us and world as two separate sides of a boundary. That boundary is gone upon death, because that's what death is. Death is the end of that boundary. But the end of the boundary doesn't mean the end of the contents of the dissociation. It doesn't mean the end of your lifetime's experiences, of your memories, of your insights. It's not the end of that. It's the end of the boundary that kept them separate from the cognitive environment in which they have always been immersed. So now, instead of being kept within a boundary, now they are free to be inferentially connected with the rest of nature. So the end of this dissociation is not the end of one's inner life. It's not the end of one's memories, of one's experiences, of one's insights. We never found memories in the brain. Memory seems to be something that is not really connected to the brain. So if the brain is no longer there, it stands to reason, at least based on the empirical evidence we have, that memory would still be there. The only thing that we have found is access paths to memory are linked, correlated to certain brain areas, like the hippocampus. But the memory contents themselves don't seem to be there, because even a person about to die from dementia with the brain ravaged, more than 50% of it gone, a person who couldn't remember anything for the past 10 years, a day before that person dies, and it's a phenomenon called terminal lucidity, the person suddenly remembers everything. So where the hell was that memory? So it stands to reason to think that the end of the dissociation is not the end of the memories of your entire lifetime.
Yeah.
It's just that those memories, those experiences, those insights become available to the broader cognitive context of nature at large. So during an NDE, it's completely reasonable within idealism that in an NDE your dissociative boundary becomes precarious, porous, it's no longer enforcing the dissociation very well. It's completely reasonable to expect that you could then come in touch with memories and experiences that were once part of a person's inner life. And now they become available in the broader cognitive context of nature, and you come across those. And how would you describe that encounter? You would describe it exactly as Anita Goswami described meeting her father, by being her father, by experiencing the inner life of her father, which is now broadly available to the entire field of cognition of nature and no longer kept captive within a dissociative boundary.
It makes sense if I try to imagine it, just the image of life, let's say in its simplest form of just a single-celled organism, then once that dies, those molecules in the earth are, they'll find their way. I mean, they'll find their way to trees, to other plants, and those contents, so to speak, if we take the image of the molecule, right, it's an image as a sort of a content of experience of that organism, right? It sort of dissipates through nature.
Yeah, metaphorically, that's the way to think about it.
Metaphorically, yeah.
If you are rigorous, you could still say, well, no, there is information in the structure in which, according to which those molecules organize themselves in the brain. So if that structure is no longer there, information is lost. And that's correct. The point is that under analytic idealism, what we call the physical world is a dashboard representation of the real states of the world. And dashboard representations don't need to be complete. They don't need to tell you everything there is to know about the states of the world. They only tell you what is useful for you to know in order to survive. So a lot of what may be going on out there in nature, in our immediate neighborhood, in our immediate surroundings, may not be picked up by our sensors and dashboard dials because they don't have a causal influence on us that could change the course of our lives or make it easier or more difficult to survive and reproduce. So evolution would never have equipped us with a cognitive system that picks those elements out because they don't have a function to perform. But of course, we could be absolutely surrounded and overwhelmed by things that we don't need to know because they don't have a causal impact on us. So the states of the experiential states that I'm talking about, which are related to memory, which again, we could never find in the brain. You can decapitate a planaria, a little aquatic flatworm, and wait for the planaria to grow a new head, and the planaria still remembers what the planaria knew before you decapitated it, even though the nervous system of the planaria is entirely within the planaria's head. Or you can eliminate 90% of the brain of a rat, and you don't eliminate the rat's memory of how to navigate a maze. If you cut more of the brain, then the rat can't move anymore, and you can't study the rat anymore.
So we don't have a dashboard representation of memories, and that is fascinating.
Yeah.
That is fascinating.
Exactly.
That it's something so important we don't have in our dashboard.
We can access memories. We have a dashboard representation of the access path to memory. It certainly goes through the hippocampus, because if you cut the hippocampus, no, you can't access memories anymore. But the records themselves are not in the dashboard.
Yeah, and that's
what evidence shows.
Because I also had a question coming in: how our experiences are reported to mind at large? So when we die, it all goes back to mind at large. But how does that work when we still live? To me, that's not really a question anymore. I think because it is all part of mind at large, but it is spread out, so to speak, when we die. In a sense, it's structure, it's order.
That's
the fragments of Bernardo's life experiences are all over the universe.
Yeah. But the universe as it is in itself is not necessarily extended, because extension, space-time, is an artifact of our perceptual cognition. It's how we organize information about the world to prevent being overwhelmed. It's not an objective scaffolding of the world out there. Both science and philosophy are really going in that direction now. In physics, for instance, time has lost its status as a fundamental extension in nature. It seems to be an epiphenomenon of microscopic quantum organizational templates. I don't want to use the word process, because process is already time-bound. But there is something about quantum level structure that appears to us as the flow of time. But that thing is not itself flowing in time. Know what I mean? A time flow is a projection of it. Yeah. So the super advanced grand unification theories around loop quantum gravity, the alternatives to M theory and string theory, they're all going in this direction. It is different from string theory, which proposed 10 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. Now we are like, well, there actually may be no extension at all. Nature as it is in itself may not be extended. It may be described as a sort of a set of mathematical relationships which don't flow and are not extended. So in that sense, what we see is that the states that do appear on our dashboard, the states that are represented on our dashboard, are always present states. Yeah. States related to what we call the present. We can't perceive the future. Show me, where is the future? Now show me where the past is. Where is the past? Can you point at it? Can you hand the past over to me so I can measure it? We can't. Physicality as a dashboard representation seems to be uniquely bound to what we call the present. Memories are not the present. Memories are accesses to states that are in the past, to past states. So it doesn't seem to have a physical representation, which is coherent because all physical representations correspond to the present. It is just our little metaphor that we like to impose on nature of memory as records on a flash drive. Where is the flash drive in our heads? Well, guess what? It's not there because we do not represent states that are not present states. And memory is a direct access to past states. So you are not going to find them in physical representation because physical representation is consistently a present thing. I think that is the insight that is coming. We'll see.
Thanks. Yeah, people liked us talking about bacteria, and something that I know a little about. I think you know more about sort of the more technical way to look at it. I'm more a bit from the storytelling way, but the question if there could not be some form of meta-consciousness already within bacteria, since we know so little about sort of the complexity of these microbial communities. And that I know is true, that we know very little about the complexity there. For instance, there are bacteria that sort of invent new antibiotics all the time against their enemies, and that's stuff that we in laboratories, I mean, we can develop with lots of effort and we have to go to these bacteria to see what they have invented again against their enemies. And those are complex molecules. That it's just crazy what these bacteria do.
Amoeba build little shells out of mud particles in the water where they live. So they can live in that shell and use it for protection. So they architect that thing. There are species of fungus, even there is a unicellular sort of fungus that implements a very optimal search algorithm to find food.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah.
All of this is a reflection of intelligence, of data processing, not necessarily of self-reflection or metacognition. You can be very, very intelligent without being metacognitive. Metacognition is one's ability to turn one's mind towards its own contents. So to evaluate, analyze, or otherwise inspect the contents of one's own mind. This sort of folding of mind upon itself, folding in upon itself, is not necessary for intelligence. You don't need it. You don't need to evaluate explicitly the contents of your own mind to act intelligently. Ant colonies are amazingly intelligent. So are those little other insects that eat wood. How do I say that in English? Oh, I forgot the name. But they also build these colonies with very sophisticated air ventilation systems, with shafts and vents, and the whole thing is placed in a very optimal way to keep the colony cool. It's amazing, right? Very intelligent. But none of this suggests the presence of metacognition. When you get metacognition, my species starts acting separate from instinct, because instead of being sort of connected to the web of instinct, which is very intelligent, you start second-guessing yourself. First, an instinctual answer comes, I should do this, but then you start, oh, should I really do this? Or let me think about this. Let me make a list of pros and cons. That is metacognition. When you start hesitating, deliberating, planning, pondering, those are the signs that betray the presence of metacognition, not the intelligence of an amoeba. I acknowledge the reader's point that these very simple organisms can in fact be extremely complex in their behavior, and that their behavior does reflect high intelligence, much more than we used to grant them. But I don't see any of this as a sign of metacognition.
And then getting back to where we started with IIT, I mean, is it possible already to calculate the phi of an amoeba, of a bacteria?
In principle, it is. In practice, we would need a resolution of measurement that we just don't have. And that's one of the great challenges that faces IIT, because it is such a theoretically rich approach. It sort of asks for a level of measurement resolution, because it can work with that level of measurement resolution. Because it can do that, it asks for it. But we do not have the technology to have that kind of resolution in the way we measure metabolism. We cannot measure metabolism at a molecular level. While IIT, if we could, IIT could crunch those numbers. It is sophisticated enough to do that. But we don't have the numbers because we can't measure them. So IIT researchers today take a very pragmatic approach. They make the data coarse-grained. They make simplifying assumptions. And that's one of the greatest challenges, because in making simplifying assumptions, you may be adding errors without even knowing. You may be ignoring things that are very important. So that's a key challenge for the theory today. But I submit to you, this would necessarily be a key challenge for any theory that has a chance to be correct.
Yeah.
You cannot avoid that.
Clear. Yeah, this last one, I think we already answered this a lot during the free will, but someone really practically asks, how does one know what nature's purpose with you is?
If only there were the 7 steps to finding out nature's purpose. I'm not a recipes guy. I can't tell people what to do with their lives. I just share thoughts about what I think life is. But I can share something about how I deal with it, which may be completely inapplicable to other people's lives, because we are all sort of unique manifestations of nature. So I don't know whether this will have any use. But there are some hallmarks of what I like to describe as the movements of the impersonal within us, which is what nature is trying to do through you, which is totally not personal. There are some hallmarks. I directly experience the movements of the impersonal within me in a way that could easily lead some to say, well, if I can directly experience those movements, then they are me. And there's a sense in which this is correct, but that me is not your personal self. That me is not Bernardo Kastrup. But the ego tends to sort of try to take possession of it, to see, to feel directly the movements of the impersonal, and then extend its whole identity to it, but still associate it with your personal name. I think that's me. I am that big. We call that ego inflation, and it can lead to catastrophe, not only in your own life, but in the lives of everybody around you. It's a very dysfunctional psychological process, ego inflation, and it can be dysfunctional at a planetary scale. You could argue that Trump and Putin are highly ego inflated. They grew their sense of personal selves to take possession of the impersonal movements of their entire civilizations and societies. So the way I go about it is I try to keep my ego small. It is not non-existent. I had a direct experience of the presence of my ego recently in my attempt to debate team modeling, in which he pissed the hell out of me.
Yeah, I could see it. You'd snapped. Yeah.
Yeah. There clearly is something in his personality that's present in mine. And in mine, I try to give expression to it in a way that sort of is socially acceptable. He doesn't. He just lets it all out. And that recognition, that mirror recognition of something that exists in me, but is sort of kept under boundaries, seeing that reflected to me in that way pissed me off. So there is an ego there. And an ego is a good tool. You need an ego to know to which mouth to bring the fork, right? If you don't have an ego, it becomes tough. But I try to keep it restricted, and the hallmarks of the movement of the impersonal, as I experience them, are the following. It tends to have nothing to do with your personal agenda. It's a manifestation of a will that doesn't care what your personal goals are, what your next career step will be, will you have a good salary or not, do you live in the place where you want to live, can you pay your mortgage, Will you have food on the table tomorrow? It doesn't give a damn about any of these things. Not the least. Your ego has to be there in order to make sure that you remain alive. Because the movements of the impersonal, that will doesn't care about you personally. Another big hallmark of it, I think we talked about it once, another big hallmark of it is that it doesn't come with an explanatory narrative. It doesn't tell you why it wants it. That it's just an impersonal will that you feel, directly experience, and you feel that it wants to express itself through you, but it doesn't tell you why you want to do this or that or the other thing. It doesn't bother even trying. There is no nice, coherent narrative about the why, the reasons, or what is the expected outcome. How does it connect with everything else? None of that. None of that. And that's a hallmark of the movement of the impersonal. When you are deceiving yourself, saying that your personal narrative is the narrative of nature, how do you know that? Well, you know that because your personal narrative always comes couched in a very nice, consistent, and logical story. I want to do this because I can save this and that person, and it will have this social impact. That's your own story. And it may be a good story, but it's not the movement of the impersonal. The movement of the impersonal comes without any narrative, no explanation. It just says, this is the way to go. Why? No, there's no why. But what about me? No, don't care.
Yeah.
A third characteristic, and this is very personal, I know for a fact that other people experience it differently.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't follow it, it makes me suffer. It will translate into either a serious psychological imbalance, anxiety, or a sense of being wasting time, which is one of the worst things. When you come to the end of the day and you go to bed and you have that feeling that something about this day didn't contribute to anything, like you're just getting older. No, the wall of death is coming closer and you're not doing the thing. No, the thing's not happening. You're just wasting your time. I experience that if I'm not following the movement of the impersonal. Or I can become self-absorbed. I can have some health anxiety, my world becomes small, I turn inwards, very personal. Not inwards in the sense of the vastness of the collective unconscious, but inwards in the sense of the tininess of the personal self. I can somatize it. I can get, I have irritable bowel syndrome. That can get a lot worse. Or changes my mood. I can start getting angry for very little reason. In traffic, especially in traffic. Traffic tends to get me really pissed sometimes. So that's another hallmark. It's when you feel it, you ignore it, and you get away with it for a little while, and then your life starts becoming miserable. And you know why. There is that voice in your head saying, you're not paying attention. You're not doing the thing. And your life starts becoming miserable. So these are the three hallmarks for me. But for other people, it can be different. I don't know. I can't give you the 7 steps to figuring out, and I wish I had them.
But I think there's so much similarity between the things you're saying right now and the book I'm reviewing, The Answer to Job, because there's a lot of Job versus Yahweh here.
Yeah.
So Yahweh doesn't
He
doesn't care about Job. And the stories, the story making and the storytelling, that's all Job and his reflection.
Yeah.
The stories have to come from Job. Yahweh is just doing.
Yahweh is just the power behind the storms.
And that, I think, is just a final question. We should not ponder about it too long, but though it's very important, is the question someone asked, how to derive an ethics from an idealist perspective, especially when we said about free will what you said about it, and this also, that it doesn't care at that level in a sense, and still we as humans, we're ethical beings, right? We want stories, and stories are about ethics, and how then to inform our ethics from an idealist metaphysics.
I'm not an ethics philosopher. So
I know.
We really should go after the people who have spent their lives thinking this through. I can only contribute something out of my personal experience, which is not any better than what you can hear from your neighbor, if you know what I mean. I'm not specialized in the subject, but I think one key factor is, one, we are not anomalies, because we identify with our conscious inner life, and we are told that nature is not conscious. Nature is just physical in the sense of being something completely distinct from consciousness. So it feels like we are anomalies, like we don't belong here. We are ephemeral anomalies that come to an end very quickly and serve no good purpose whatsoever, because you could have all structure and function without experience. Experience has no causal powers under physicalism. It's just a byproduct, and a transitory, ephemeral one. So it feels like we are anomalies. Under idealism, we are not. The world is of the same kind of that which you identify with, which is your conscious experience. The world, too, is made of conscious experience, not your conscious experience. There is conscious experience out there in other people and in nature at large, but it's also conscious experience. It's something of the same nature of that which you are. So we belong here. We are home. So that's one ethical question. Another ethical question is the kinship between us all. Not only are you and me of the same kind, conscious humans, we are no two, because the core subjectivity in you is the core subjectivity in me. It's not like we have two identical core subjectivities. No, it's one dissociated core subjectivity doing you and the same core subjectivity doing me. The thing that looks out through our eyes is the same thing. The same thing that looks out through your eyes and the same thing that looks out through my eyes. We have two eyes. We can see that immediately. Close one eye and look at your finger. Now close the other eye and look at the same finger. It's different. Here I see this part of the finger. Here I see this part of the finger. It's not the same experience. These are two different experiences, but both are me. It's just that when I have both my eyes open, my mentation coalesces the two experiences together in a unity. But it's not, what I'm going to say here is not true, but I will pretend that it's true because it makes my point. If you sever the corpus callosum that connects the two halves of your brain, you would not have a unified experience. Actually, you do, but pretend that it doesn't, because it makes my point. The difference between you and me on the one hand and my left and right eyes on the other is only that in the case of the two eyes, there is a meta level of cognition in which the two experiences are merged together. If there weren't this meta level of experience, if there weren't this junction, your left eye would think, I am Bernardo, and your right eye would think, I am Hans. That's exactly what's happening. Nature has many eyes.
Yeah.
It's looking out into the world through your eyes and through mine.
Yeah.
And we do not have access to that unifying experience because we are dissociated.
And bringing that to ethics, I'd say like good, bad, and it coalesces on a higher level. Is that a way to look at it?
I personally don't buy into obviously what we call the good and what we call the bad are both parts of nature. But to me, that doesn't translate into moral relativism, in saying that everything is equivalent in some way. I don't think that. I think we should strongly oppose evil. And I think we are paying an enormous price today in 2023 because we have not strongly opposed evil before. So I'm not a moral relativist in that sense. I acknowledge good and evil are integral parts of nature, but I think we carry the responsibility as the metacognitive part of nature to pass value judgments and say, this is functional and conducive to growth, and this is dysfunctional and should be stopped or bounded in some way.
From our perspective, right? Because that you have to add then from the Yahweh, the mind at large perspective, it does not have that problem that we have. It does not have that problem of suffering because it...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, Yahweh is never stopped on its tracks when it faces an impossible obstacle. There's nothing beyond it. Yeah. Everything happens within it.
But we, because we are these tiny dissociated segments of the mind of nature, we face these impossible obstacles all the time. So we are stopped in our tracks and we are forced to think about it self-reflectively, metacognitively. And metacognition is the enabler of value judgment. So I think insofar as we are the only metacognitive phenomena of nature that we know of, and we are, maybe non-human intelligences are also metacognitive, but they are not sitting on this table right now.
Yeah.
So as far as we can talk about, we are the only metacognitive manifestations of nature. That makes us the only manifestations of nature capable of value judgment. So I think passing value judgment is not only our capacity, but it's our responsibility, because there is no other game in town. I think we must pass value judgment and say, this is functioning okay, this I'm going to resist. That's okay.
Beautiful. I think
what happened in Israel 3 days ago is not okay.
No.
That must be resisted. What's happening in Ukraine is not okay, must be resisted.
Yeah.
What has been happening in Palestine for decades, that's
also
not
okay.
Okay.
No.
Must be resisted. It's just that what happened 3 days ago is not resistance. That's what I mean. So I think we are invested by nature with the responsibility to pass value judgments. And there is no implication between the acknowledgement that good and evil are all part of nature and then concluding that there is nothing we should do about it. No. I think, yes, they're both part of nature, and yes, we have the responsibility to pass value judgment and contain evil and promote good.
There's something interesting, and that's not for now, but between Eastern and Western thinking here that I'd like to unpack with you, because I do think there's a difference here between Eastern non-dualist thinking and sort of Western thinking at its core. But that's for another video, Bernardo.
Planning to even write a book about it.
Oh, seriously? Okay, then you're onto something, of course, again. Okay, thanks so much for watching. This has been a long session again. Yeah, please keep on commenting, and I'm actually thinking about sort of finding people also to help us to sort of manage the community, because as comments it's just hard for us to read everything, and I just hope that you understand that, and sort of the people whose questions were sort of being answered here are happy with that, and you all enjoyed this. But thanks very much for watching. Please subscribe, please comment, and help us grow. Thanks, Bernardo.
It's been a pleasure, as always.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice to hear. Likewise.